So welcome to Digital Pharma Unlocked meeting. This is our 8th event. The community was set up in October 2022 when we had a debate on, is this the end of the pharma rep? And joining me in that debate back then was Paul Sims. That's how I got to know Paul. And this is kind of a continuation of that discussion, but slightly different. Since that time, we've built the community to 1,300 people, of which many of you are here present today. So thank you for joining. You may know it's deliberately honest, deliberately free, and deliberately daring. I wish I hadn't come up with those words because deliberately daring is really hard to say. But that's what we're trying to do. We try and pick topics that aren't usually covered at Reuters and Next, etc. These are meant to be things for open, honest discussion without pre-preparation, although I do believe Paul Sims has answers, cribbed his answers to all these questions. So if you see him referring to his iPad, he's cheating. What I'm going to like to do now, if we have the technical capabilities, is play a short video before we get on to the debate. This is a video that Paul and I put together to highlight some bad practice within selling and maybe some old school thinking. I will say that when we posted this online, and some of you helped us do that, we did get some genuine inquiries as to whether this was a product. But I'd like to play for you now to hear and online a video called Caller.
Are you a medical representative under pressure to meet your reach and frequency targets? Then Caller is the solution for you. Simply record your 90-second sales pitch, select up to 100 random customers from our list, hit send to blast your pitch to all of them all at once. Whenever you want, wherever they are, whatever they're doing, whether they want it or not. Boom! You've just blown your KPIs for this quarter out of the water. Time to head home or hit the course. So, what are you waiting for? Download Caller now and blast your message fast. Caller.inc is not responsible for the quality of your sales blast and do not guarantee the relevance, interest, or validity of the HCPs on our database. But who cares, because you're going to smash your cold target and nobody will know. Terms and conditions apply.
Nice work, Paul. So not completely aligned to this topic, but something around, are they sort of vanity metrics, which you ran an event on before. So in a moment, I'm going to ask each of the panel members to introduce themselves and to say what they believe or what they think around the phrase that pharma has become too precious to promote. But I'm going to do that first for myself. So my name's James Harper. For those of you who don't know me, I've set up a company called 28B. 28B is all about enabling and empowering field teams, commercial and medical, but most of our experience is in commercial. And I firmly believe that if you believe in your product, then you should be proud to promote that product to HCPs. And in fact, when I moved from primary care to secondary care as a rep back in the day, so long ago that we used carbon copy paper to record our calls and not a CRM, I was lucky enough to be selected to do the secondary care promotion of olanzapine, which is a product, an atypical antipsychotic for treating schizophrenia. Doctors called my phone. They called me for meetings. And it really built in me a view that a commercial representative has huge value in educating, but also selling to HCPs. And what that highlighted for me, that doctors were calling me to learn about that product, is that when you want something, when you need a solution, you like to be sold to. And selling may have got a dirty, but that's when you sell badly. If you sell well, you don't notice it. And if you have a need, you like to be sold to well. So that's my view on this. And I do believe that as an industry, the rise of medical affairs and field medical may have given us an excuse to not sell to our customers and to hide behind value and need. And actually, that may be a little disingenuous. And our role as commercial field teams is to be proud of our products and to promote them to HCPs. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to my medical colleague, not on the commercial side, to introduce himself.
So hello, everyone. Welcome. Faisal Mahmood. I'm a physician by background, but I've been a pharmaceutical physician for the last just over 20 years, predominantly in medical affairs, although I've done time in clinical development and drug safety, predominantly in Europe, UK and France, but also spent time in the US. And my kind of perception of the role of pharma and the effectiveness of promotion has evolved dramatically, both before I joined as a physician and what I thought what the role was and how effective it was, and over the last 20 years, and we can We can go into that in terms of which way the pendulum is swinging at the moment later.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rena, and I am a compliance addict. I'm not even joking about that. So I guess my interest in this area, I've been in the industry for nearly 30 years, and I've worked in a variety of medical roles. I'm a medical signatory, and I'm a compliance expert when it comes to the code. And the code is unfairly blamed for a lot of things. It'll get dragged into everything. But that, to me, is the beauty of compliance. Because of the nature of the code, I have a very strong opinion about most areas in pharma, sales and marketing and medical all included. So my take on this question is I don't understand the question. And as any good signatory would do, they'd ask 3 more questions to clarify it so that I can give you a non-grey answer. Because I don't want to sit here and say it depends, because everyone's frankly sick of that one, right? So to give a clear answer, if someone said to me, are sales too scared to sell? I would say, why aren't sales using that selling word? And if someone said to me, are MSLs more important than reps? I would say no, but I think they are. So, moving onwards.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Andrew Binns. I'm head of digital and innovation within AstraZeneca UK. Coming from a non-pharma background, I found it really interesting around the word sales, influencing, persuading, activating, motivating. We're all deemed dirty words. I was absolutely told that you've got to use the word educate and inform when we're talking to our HCPs. And a story that I told in Barcelona last week, a conversation that really resonated with me, is I talk a lot around the fact that I see a conversion-based content strategy is what's needed to sell our drugs, right? And a lady, really, really senior, far cleverer than me, far more experienced than me, from Med Affairs, she said, I actually find it really offensive the way that you talk around how pharma companies should be engaging with HCPs. Our job isn't to sell, our job isn't to influence, our job isn't to persuade. You're belittling HCPs' value and their expertise, and our job is purely to provide them with the scientific narrative and then hope that they will then make the right decision in treating their patients. And she told me that story through the window of a brand new Porsche that she'd bought. And I was like, when did you buy that? She was like, with the pharma company bonus that we all got. It was amazing. And I was like, I felt a tad hypocritical because as everyone knows, our bonuses are paid on the number of drugs sold. Our bonuses aren't paid on the number of lives we save. So I think if we were open and honest enough to say, well, listen, if pharma companies' success is dependent on the number of drugs we sell, that ultimately benefits because then we can invest in more R&D and come up with better drugs to help people's lives. But what's the shame in saying that our number one remit is to sell more drugs? And that really resonated with me, that there's people still in existence that are offended by some of the phrases that we're going to talk about today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Paul. I run a company called Impatient Health, and I stood on a stage 10 years ago and asked everyone a question. And the question was, in 5 years, will the majority activity of salespeople still be sales? And 95% of the people in the room said no. And I thought, that is just so weird, isn't it? Because we are continuing to employ all of these salespeople, and all of us are predicting that this is not going to be the main activity. I genuinely believe that pharma has become apologetic, pathetic, weak-willed, and really doesn't stand up for itself in terms of where its value actually is. However, I also believe that what we shouldn't be doing is obsessing about selling pills. I think that most companies that obsess over selling their product, with perhaps the exception of a couple, don't generally fire the imagination or excitement of their customers. I think that we should be selling health. I think that health is the most emotive industry of all industries. And you will have heard me say maybe that if Elon Musk can get people excited about batteries, if Steve Jobs got people excited about laptops, we should sure as hell damn it be able to get people excited about health. We're the most emotive industry of all, and we have absolutely no excuses. And we should just start talking about the future a little bit instead of the past. We should start talking about what's possible and inspire our customers. And that is how I think that we will change the nature of the relationship, both educate and sell to them at the same time, maybe. So I don't know why we don't do that.
Thank you very much for all of those. I'm going to pick on Faisal because I expected Paul to be more medical here, and you've done that deliberately. Thank you for doing that. So you talked about the pendulum swinging as though there's two sides to this, as though there's two separate things. And I spend a lot of my time thinking about customer experience. Forgive me, I use the word customer. HCPs are customers. And in order to deliver great customer experience, we need to know and understand that customer, and we should work together. And yet, I don't know why I keep doing this. And yet, we often talk about sides. We often talk about pendulums, as in the amount, etc. What's your view on? Well, let me just ask you straight out. Do you think there should be commercial sales teams, or do you think medical teams are the answer, or a combination of the two?
Yeah. So, I mean, in short, I think there is still a very important central role for field sales promotions in all medicines. And I suppose, as I was saying before I came into industry, one of the things that kind of made me hesitant about coming to industry as a pharmaceutical, as a physician, was I was thinking people are going to confuse me to be a sales rep. And indeed, for the first 5, 6, 7, maybe 10 years, even today, many of my, my peers at medical school keep come up to me and say, "Oh, have you got a pen? Can I borrow a pen? Can I have a pen?" Right? As a kind of a dick, right? And I keep having to explain to, I'm in the research side of the medical, and so on and so forth. They do it as a joke, of course. And the reason why is because they didn't think that there was any utility in those days of what a field salesperson was doing. But they were obviously wrong, right? They were clearly wrong. And during the course of my career within pharmaceutical medicine, there's been a few anecdotes where it's really rammed home the importance of the notion that no drug will ever sell itself, no matter how good. So there's one particular example. In a prior company I was working at, I was based out of the United States, and I was working on a drug which had its primary indication for improving the platelet count for patients. But in that particular setting, there was one clinician, a very senior clinician at the National Cancer Institute, very prestigious and renowned institute in the United States, who was worried that people would start using this drug to improve platelet counts of patients who had severe plastic anemia. So all 3 lineages of the blood cells were down. And he was worried that people would start doing that when it's going to be completely ineffective, because the target that we were hitting was not there, essentially, for patients who had our primary indication. So he convinced us to do a study to prove that this drug doesn't work in these patients. Because he was worried that physicians are going to be desperate, patients are going to be desperate, going to start using it. So we did a study. To cut a long story short, of the interim results of this NCI-sponsored study, we got a New England Journal of Medicine publication, and we got FDA approval for that indication because all 3 lineages improved, not just platelets, but white cells. Now we could quite explain it, and red cells. So I said to everyone, we don't need to do anything. We don't need any promotional effort, no sales effort. We don't have to train a single sales rep. We don't need any promotional effort. Everyone said, yeah, of course, because no new medicine in this setting for 30 years. There's a small number of physicians who manage these patients by the time they get to this stage. And they will all know about they don't need to do anything. We just need to go through the regulatory process and everything will take care of itself. And everyone agreed. A week or so after FDA approval, I was on a trip from Philadelphia, where I was based, to Minneapolis, and I was seeing a clinician about some study I was trying to set up. And at the end, as I was leaving, I said, "Oh, great news about this, we got the FDA approval for this." And they said, "What are you talking about?" And he goes, well, we got the, for severe, plastic anemia. And she didn't know what I was talking about. And I was really shocked. So I quickly went through the data with her, and she said, "Oh, that's really impressive." And this kind of stuck in my mind. I then took a trip. I drove then from there to the Mayo Clinic, which is a few hours away. #1 hospital on earth, essentially. And I went to the professor of hematology there about a different project. But the first thing I asked this person was, "Are you aware about this?" And they said, "No." And so I quickly went through it. And they actually had a patient on the ward they didn't know what to do with. And they prescribed that, they texted me afterwards. And that's when I realized that the importance and value of the promotional effort is not just about soliciting and asking for that prescription, which is an important part to close it, of course. It's about raising awareness around the scientific narrative, around the value of the medicine, and raising that noise in an area where there's a lot of competing priorities. It always has been, but now it's got even worse. So where I was telling you about the pendulum, we are now getting into a stage where it's even very high-tech innovations in areas of high unmet need. The information is being completely drowned out by so much noise. So actually us pushing out appropriate information, primarily through a field promotional effort, but also through non-personalized promotion, is now more important than ever. So my kind of view on this has changed quite dramatically over the years, but hopefully that gives you a flavor of where I'm thinking these days.
It does. I was up at the MSLA conference last week, and a big focus there was storytelling, etc., which feels like a very commercial sales thing, etc. And they were, every time I go to the MSLA conference, I learn more about the medical side of the business. And I also appreciate the work that goes in there. And I also appreciate that they maybe don't look down on commercial as much as I thought they did. But they did say there's a lot to learn from commercial around storytelling and about making that noise, etc. And when we challenged there during a discussion, if we didn't need salespeople, then you could say that the NICE guidelines, right? NICE guidelines are based on a lot of logic and research, and they're published, and yet they're not followed. I think if the NICE team had a sales team, that actually the NICE guidelines might be better followed. Having said that, of course, if we're in the NICE guidelines in a positive place, we do push that as a sales team, so we got some benefit there. I don't know if anyone's got a comment on what struck me from what you said, Faisal, is there's still a scientific base to this, and of course our sales should be based on science and evidence. But what about the emotional side of selling? What about the storytelling? What about the promotion, the advertising? Kind of looking at you here, Andrew, on science aside, maybe. What about the emotive, creative side of things?
It's a really good question, and I think one of the things that I'm still quite confused about is how we have scientific narrative or emotive messaging. I think if you think of how any of us have been sold to in the last 2 hours, there's different stages that we get sold to. Sometimes it's an emotive aspect, sometimes it's grabbing our attention. If one of our customers has a bias towards another product or they're unaware of our products, we've got to shift them out of that apathy. So pushing scientific narrative to them at that stage is a waste of time because they don't have the mindset to absorb that message. I think that's a mistake pharma makes, is we go very early on in the scientific narrative. So emotive messaging to try and grab their attention, to try and prompt their interest. When they're ready to evaluate our products, that's when I think the really robust scientific narrative, which I think we all agree pharma knocks out the park, that's when you can position it to them. So it starts unifying commercial and medical content at the same time. Because if we truly believe that HCPs are at the centre of our strategy, why do we have 3 different strategies? Why have we got a market access strategy, a medical strategy and a commercial strategy? If we put the HCP, they don't care who creates the content. And I also don't think having sales teams as the deliverers of it is always the answer. I see the sales teams as an incredibly valuable channel that we push the content out to, but it's quite frustrating as a marketeer when you hear and see reports on channel preference. Like, oh, HCPs prefer emails delivered at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It's like, well, first of all, HCPs don't want emails off pharma. But second of all, it's not the email that's landed with them, it's the content of the email that's landed with them. You think about any of us, again, when you last bought something, did you buy it because it was delivered to you on a channel you preferred? Or did you buy it because the content of it was what motivated you and activated you? So I think sales or digital, that's just the marketing mix. There's no other sector that segments its channel delivery as much as pharma does. How Lyle and Scott have engaged with me to buy this jumper. I genuinely can't remember how I bought this jumper, but I can remember the message that made me buy it. It was like, you're getting on a bit, Andrew. This jumper will make you look a lot cooler.
Really?
So well, I know. I'll get my money back. But that's the thing that made me buy it, not because it was delivered on an email from Amazon or whoever it was. And so I think there's a place for scientific narrative. Of course there is. Doctors need that. But we've got to grab their attention. Otherwise, they're happy living in the world of prescribing our competitor drugs.
Okay, so we had a question from someone who couldn't join us today, Mark Rees-Saunders from Astellas, medical side of things, medical field excellence?
Yeah.
Medical field excellence, who joined us as a speaker on a previous event. And it speaks to this and to Faisal's point as well. When he, and I'm going to paraphrase here because I mistakenly didn't write down his question, but he was essentially saying that if a field medical, an MSL, was in front of a customer and there was a legitimate exchange of scientific information that clearly positioned the place for a product, if not promoting it, is that enough? And then once the HCP knows it, then they'll use it appropriately.
Say that again.
I've got to be very careful because I'll need to pull it out of from LinkedIn to make sure it's clear.
Okay.
But the essence or the principle is the same as what Andrew is talking to, is that sometimes legitimate scientific exchange is not enough to convince someone to use a product. Otherwise, the NICE guidelines would be used across the board by every HCP. So we have a role in as a commercial field team and other channels. I completely agree. And in fact, the very first event that I referenced earlier about is this the end for the rep, it absolutely depends. You know, there are some products in some therapy areas with some target audiences where there's no point having a field team. And it's much better done digitally or a combination of the two. So I wholeheartedly agree with that. But aside from the scientific, there is the keeping us top of mind. You know, one exchange with an HCP and my old school of repping, the reach and frequency, as vanity metrics as those are, did keep you on top of reminding people of your product and placing them. Why? Not just because people are forgetful, but there's other field teams out there doing the same thing. And there's other newer, more exciting things that may be less or more appropriate. I don't know, Paul, if you want to speak to...
Well, I think your question, James, is basically, if there's a doctor in the room, should the doctor... well, I don't think anyone's going to argue that the doctor shouldn't have the final prescribing say, but should the salesperson push the product because that is their job to sell, or should they hold back and let the doctor make a scientific decision? And Andrew and I ended up in a debate with a whole room of medical people, and I think you were pretty much the only one in the room saying, sorry, it's my job to sell as many medicines as I can. That's what I'm being paid for. It's what I'm being bonused on. It's what my targets are. It's what I'm here to do. And I'm sorry, but, you know, in that situation, I'm going to push my product. Is Andrew wrong? Are you wrong? I don't know. That's, for me, the crux of it. And that's what the question is about. And I would like to see the differences of opinion on this panel.
So I'm 100% with Andrew. I was old school and pushing a product, not to the point of it being too much, I hope, but equally not to people who didn't need it. And this is where selling gets a bad name, right? Good selling, you almost don't notice.
Yep.
And also, if you want to buy something, we may not like to being sold to badly, but we love buying stuff, especially when you're buying stuff that solves a problem. And that's where good selling comes in. If the rep can identify a problem that the HCP is dealing with, which is often patient-related. And I say often because sometimes it's troublesome patients, not necessarily patient outcomes. Who's coming through my door? Who's taking up my time? At the MSA conference, I'll reference again because it was a great conference, we had a presentation from Scott McKenzie, NHS strategist consultant, 130,000 headcount. We're down 130,000 headcount in the NHS. So workload is sky high. So almost every HCP's problem is workload. How do you solve that? You don't solve it by going and saying, can we do more work together, right? Can we do a project together, etc. What you say is how your product will reduce their workload by treating patients and keeping them out of his clinic. That is great selling if you identify that need. It's solving a problem. We should be proud to do it. We don't know. Do anyone disagree with that one? We've done that thing again where everyone in the panel actually agrees. Last time, it's Andrew's fault. Last time.
No, I was trying to.
Yeah.
Well, I reckon that there must be people disagreeing with what we just said about.
I guess I just want to bring the code back into the conversation, obviously. So I think, so some of the problem is partly down to the fact that the code itself separates promotion and non-promotion. It puts them into very different buckets. And our interpretation of that has formed sides, as you mentioned earlier. We talk about the pendulum going from one to the other. And at the end of the Death of the Rep, webinar, I think the conclusion on the audience is, it's not the death of a rep, but it is the start of something different. And that was honestly speaking, pretty unsatisfying for me, because I'm left with, what now? It's not the end of a rep, so what is it the beginning of? What does this new person actually look like? And I think I lobbed something into that conversation by saying, well, the code has always allowed dual roles. It's always allowed. Why do we not know about this? Why aren't we harnessing the fact that we still use this archaic language about who owns a relationship? And that really gets on my nerves, because I don't think an HCP really cares. I did some training a while ago.
Or wants to be owned.
Exactly. I did some training a while ago. It's cross-functional room, MSLs and reps. And one of the biggest things from a compliance perspective that goes wrong is when an MSLs aren't clear about who they are. So I said to the MSLs, how are you introducing yourself to the customer? What's the first thing you say to them? My name is Rena, and I'm here to talk to you about the data. All right, great, okay, and the science. And I said to the reps, how do you introduce yourselves? Well, my name is Andrew, and I'm here to talk to you about the science and the data. And in this particular company, the reps were called RAMs, and the MSLs were called RMAs. And let's just think for a moment about that poor HCP who A, doesn't really care, but B, is now completely confounded. And the compliance risk that's been introduced there, when actually, why isn't the rep called a rep? Why are we not calling sales reps? And why is the sales rep not saying, I'm here to sell? And that tells me it's sales who don't feel it's credible.
Certainly, CAMs don't like it when you call them reps. We've been elevated from a rep to a key account manager, and I'm afraid 80% made up figure of the field teams that we engage with that are CAMs are not empowered to be true CAMs. They're reps with a new name. Right? A true key account manager can say no to their boss about which account they work. They can work around budgets, etc. Instead, it's often renamed representatives. And I'm proud as hell to have been a rep, primary and secondary. I tell this anecdote quite a lot. I fell out of university with a debt and a broken down VW camper van and a science degree. I picked up the Telegraph after being bullied by my girlfriend to finally get a job. On a Thursday, and in the back, they advertised science, anyone with a science degree, the jobs you could get. And there was a rep. It was a rep's job. It came with a car, Rover 214i, bright red.
Right, right.
And my dad's a senior partner in a GP practice, or he was at the time. And I felt a little uncomfortable almost immediately, just from the induction, about the fact that we're going to be leaning on doctors and we're asking for favours and trying to get in front of them. And I almost immediately felt the need to apologise to my dad about becoming a rep, which is a weird thing, a weird state to be in. But my dad said that he values commercial representatives. Why? Because he doesn't have time to go through the data. Remember, this is well before MSLs even existed. Well, actually, I learned they were introduced in 1960, but not commonly. But the point is that he found value in those reps. And then the olanzapine experience of doctors asking me in to educate them on the data, interestingly, but also to sell, was an eye-opener for me. I think we should be really clear on what the roles are. And I've actually got a question here that follows up on that, Rena. You almost stole the question from it, which is field medical being presented as non-promotional, unbiased? Could that be a little disingenuous? Could it be that do HCPs really understand that? Because ultimately, to Andrew's point earlier, at some point, there are shareholders. At some point, we report into someone commercial, whatever you are. If you're even the director of medical director, the highest you come, at some point, someone above you is in commercial. So I'm going to ask you that, Faisal. Do you think doctors really buy into this non-promotional, unbiased role of the MSL?
Yeah, I mean, it's a complex question. And the reason for that is, on the one hand, in the majority of innovative pharmaceutical companies, what we are trying to do is evolve from having a perception of the discoverer and developer and distributor of novel medicines to a partner in the delivery of healthcare. And the reason why we want to try and make that transition is because we genuinely believe we have an important role in improving societal patient outcomes. And in fact, often when people ask me about how I feel about being a clinician in pharma versus being a clinician in the hospital, I always use the anecdote. Well, I feel like when I was working in the hospital, I was working like an AA repairman. Car would come in, I would try and fix them best and go off. And now working in pharma, I feel like I'm designing the car to work better in the first place. And that is how we feel, right? What actually, the elephant in the room, of course, which is where I think your question's coming from, is that often field medical are seen internally by senior commercial people as super reps, right? They go in to try and convince people based on science around the positioning of a certain medicine, if they're going in a reactive, proactive setting. And this can cause a little bit of confusion out there in the field. I've been on many, many field visits. The majority in the first half of my career was on field sales visits. And the vast majority of them, I have to say, were pretty bad, right? Often they would, and it may be just because I was coming along, that it would be that way. But often they would not say anything. They would just introduce. They'd talk a bit about golf. They would talk about this and that. They would leave something behind, organize something with the receptionist, and we would have 2, 3, 4 minutes with be it a primary care physician or secondary physician. But the ones who were really good were coming back to what you said. They didn't know, or the physician didn't, they were being sold to, because it was a natural discussion around the issues at hand for that clinician, the issues they had around managing certain patients, and had they considered alternatives and what could be offered. When I went on field medical ride-alongs, almost all have been terrible. Almost all have been absolutely terrible. And because they really didn't know what to do, right, when going in. And I would say, organize a meeting just like you would do normally. Pretend I'm not here. I just want to see what the issues are. But they felt really uncomfortable about talking about anything proactively. They were really bad scientific storytellers. The really good field medical people, again, coming to your point, are the ones who had a really good handle appropriately to bring those guidelines to life, to bring the scientific narrative to life, to really bring that to life. And if you get a really good field sales guy or lady and a really good field medical person, and you look at what they're actually talking about when it's an in-label discussion, it's not, at the end of the day, there's probably not a lot of difference. There may be a difference of how they got to that position to have that appointment, but at the end of the day, there's not a lot. Right? They're just appropriately raising awareness around the value proposition of the medicine, and so on and so forth.
But is that not really confusing for the HCP?
But that's fine.
And I also caught a smirk for Rena, one of your favourite topics, proactive. Right? Do you want to just talk to that? So I even though I've tried really hard to understand the rules and the purposes, etc., I'm in the industry, I'm confused. Like, how do our customers feel about who's promotional, non-promotional, proactive, reactive, project, etc.? Do you want to speak just briefly? There's two things I'd like you to speak to, and then we can all comment on, is the hybrid role, the idea, and that was the question in from Chimney Munja, who is an analyst from Janssen. He asked the question, what about MSLs taking the ABPI exam? And we heard at the MSLA, when you asked this question, that actually there used to be quite a lot of hybrid roles, because there's nothing wrong with being promotional and medical, but not at the same time. There used to be quite a few of those, and that's now drifted. I think there was only one person in that room, or none in the room. But I wonder if you can speak to the being proactive as field medical and the hybrid role.
Firstly, I think you should be on commission for the MSLA.
Yeah.
Great job there.
Anytime I'm allowed out.
Sales repping all over. So this is really interesting. I came across a pharma company, obviously, whose name shall remain, but the MSLs have gone on strike. This is really interesting, right? Because they've been asked to do something which they feel uncomfortable about. If you look at the code cases in this area, the MSLs asked to do something proactive and asked to be measured on that proactive interactions. Who do you think the complainant is in those cases? The MSL. So pharma is really worried and just keeping and stroking the MSLs and making sure that the please don't go to the PMCPA. But fundamentally, my whole point is, of course you could be proactive, and you're a really expensive resource. Of course pharma can measure what you're doing. And this whole nonsense piece around you can't measure me because I'm an MSL or I'm medical it's the same principle that applies really across the board, even for reps. And I think what I'm seeing is one rule for one and not the same for the other. So the question I ask is, for example, reps or MSLs, do you think it's okay for a rep to sit in the back of one of your proactive meetings? Absolutely not. Right. Why are you allowed to sit in a reps meeting then? Because I'm an MSL. So we just need to get back, all the way back down to fundamentals. The code really doesn't care whether it's a rep or an MSL sitting in front of that customer. I've even bought a prop-along.
Oh.
This is Persuasion by Jane Austen. For those of you who haven't read it and are in sales, it's fantastic. Because what it describes is an educated, intelligent person who is easily persuaded. Now, why is she persuaded? Because she trusts and respects one person in her life. And so I don't really care whether it's a rep or an MSL being proactive. What the basis of a relationship and the basis of persuasion is really fundamentally not around selling, but informing, educating, learning, etc.
But that is selling, right? So this is where I keep coming back to. But how does the code see selling? Is selling defined within the code at all?
It's like it's the only thing that is defined. Non-promotion isn't defined. And this is where the risk creeps in, because people will go, ooh, we better not call it promotion. We'll never get bums on seats if we call it promotion. So let's kind of disguise that piece, pretend it's non-promo, breach.
But how is it defined?
Non-promotion.
No, promotion.
Promotion is defined as any activity that promotes
Yeah.
something that increases the administration, consumption, purchase, sale, or prescription of your medicine.
Yeah.
So I'm going to move this to Andrew for a question, which is, we talked about trust, and we often talk about that someone in the field is a trusted advisor, but still selling, or maybe not in medical terms. How do we build trust between companies? And is it even possible? Let's say you said earlier, not field teams not always used, they're a channel. Can we build trust with our customers without a field team?
Yeah, I think so, because I think let's just analyse that word sales, okay? Because if you think about how, like, our customers, our doctors are sold to and are happy to be sold to every second of their life. Netflix sells them a movie, Burger King sells them a burger, Nike sells them trainers. They don't feel aggressively like sold to. The only time sales is a bad word is when it's done badly. And none of us like that. None of us like the double glazing harassment that you get. Marketing is sales. If anyone's like studied David Ogilvy, basically says like the best marketeers are salespeople, because they understand that any marketing activity should have a tangible action following it. And so sales isn't walking in saying sign on the dotted line. That will negate trust, right? If that's all your objective is. But getting your message out there in a contextual, relevant way to the HCP, whether it's a rep, MSL, an email, a video, fucking pigeon flying across the sky. I'm not bothered about the channel. It's the context of the message that will sell to people. There's no shame in saying every single message we create is a sales message. Now, from a code side of things, I realise we can't call ourselves that, but in non-pharma, that's everything. Everything you're engaged with by a brand has an ultimate aim of increasing your propensity to purchase something. Otherwise, why are they doing it? Pharma isn't a philanthropic organisation. We're not here to be a charity. We're here to sell our products. And as long as we do that in a compliant way, then we should be looking at ways that we can influence and persuade and sell to our HCPs in as commercial context as possible. The confusion for someone like me, who's quite new to pharma, is I've always thought like marketing is commercial. And then when I joined pharma, they were like, oh no, we've got commercial over here and medical over here. And so it is quite confusing. But the key point is that we should be thinking of how do we get our message to our HCPs in a way that is going to activate them into behaving how we want them to behave. There's no point in pretending that pharma is patient-centric when there's no way AstraZeneca would step back and say, do you know what, Dr. Andrew, we think you should prescribe Novartis' drug here. That doesn't exist. So why don't we acknowledge the fact that our job is to sell our drugs and let GSK focus on how they sell their drugs, and we should be totally, and Pfizer, you know, we're competitors. Right now, it's brilliant there's no monopolies. It's brilliant that there's compliance protecting our customers. But I think we're pretty good in pharma at self-regulating ourselves anyway. I've got a brilliant relationship with our compliance team, who are very much of the mindset now of yes if rather than no because. So I'll come to them with a campaign, and I'll, you know, some of the COPD campaigns that we're doing is really provocative to the primary care, to basically calling them out for being judgmental against people who smoke. Now, there's 7,800 people who are dying because of the lack of early diagnosis from COPD. So from an ethical point of view, we can justify having a campaign that will get code complaints. But if our primary aim is not to get a code complaint, That goes against everything that good marketing is. Sometimes got to be provocative, sometimes got to upset people, sometimes got to annoy people. HCPs aren't gods. Right? HCPs are customers, and they're our clients, and we sell to our clients.
And I think that's one of the points where we maybe over-elevate HCPs as these purely rational. If we just present the science in one meeting, they'll know exactly where to use the product and then use them. I'm going to put one question to Paul and then open up to the audience, both online and here, for questions. But Paul, you've been very quiet over there. So here's one for you. Let's flip this around. If we're all kind of agreeing that selling really well is a good thing, then do we even need medical? Or are we suffering from the sunk cost fallacy here and we just get back to commercial?
Well, let me, I'm not going to wimp out of the question, but let me just ask the audience one thing. Put your hand up if you think that medical and commercial are converging over time, so they're starting to overlap more and more and be more aligned. Okay, and just so I can check you're not asleep, put your hand up if you think that they're divergent, they're moving away. Okay, not a single person has put their hand up for the diverging. So I think that your answer is pretty damn obvious, James. I think that it is inevitable that we create a unit or a person that is multidisciplinary and able to do both things. Andrew posted a comment on LinkedIn last week that marketers who don't understand compliance are being lazy. I would massively agree, even though there was quite a lot of pushback on LinkedIn. I think that a footballer that doesn't know the boundaries of the field is never going to be a good footballer. And I think it's exactly what you just said. This kind of I'm too good, or I don't need to know the rules, or outsourcing of compliance. Of course I think that people like Rena need to exist, but they should exist as like close partners, and we should know the rules ourselves. We should know most of the rules ourselves. So whether commercial or medical, I think it's incredibly negligent to think that you're going to survive in your career without having to know the rules of the game. And that means knowing the medical rules if you're in commercial, and vice versa. And why the hell don't we start building this person today if we all just said in this room that it's inevitable that we're coming together anyway? I'm actually getting a bit tired of worrying about the two sides when they're coming together anyway.
It's certainly one of those topics we come across a lot. And I also just want to a shout out to the medical people here, because, as I said at the beginning, by far and away the most engagement I got online about this event, and I suspect the sign-ups to this event, we'll do the analysis afterwards, is predominantly medical, not commercial, when it comes to in-house, in pharma.
Can I just say, just off the back of what Paul was talking about there, that the video that was shown to everyone at the beginning, the caller clip, I think one of my first comments to both you and Paul was, that's actually compliant. And that would have been, in the past, that feedback would have, to me, would have been, you need to stay in your swim lane. Like, if it's code compliant, tell us yes or no. Don't even comment on whether it's a shit campaign or not. And I think this is where the convergence is, because people are now accepting that a medical signatory does have a right to say, that's not going to fly very well. And commercial can have a right in saying, I think it is compliant. And that's the beauty, I think, of convergence.
So the Frankenstein role that we're talking about here, or Frankenstein's monsters role, this is actually, it already exists or has existed, which is this hybrid role. So just before we go to the questions, I said I'm going to go to questions, but just before we do, can we just share with the audience, Rena, from your knowledge, like how a hybrid can exist, what they need to have in terms of certification and exams, and how they need to separate their activities. But in essence, the same person can cover both roles, which may be less confusing for our customers.
Yeah, and sorry, because I didn't answer Chinmay's question earlier, so here it is. So basically, what the code allows is for dual roles, and if a person is to act as a representative, they can't just have the sales rep exam. It's not enough to go, oh, coincidence, I happen to have this. So a rep in an organisation needs to be trained appropriately, needs to be validated, needs to be briefed on the campaign, needs to be measured for their promotional output. That's the bare minimum you'd expect from a rep. And then an MSL, acting non-promotionally, must have very clear objectives and and all the rest of it as well. So while one person can act as both, they can't act like that in the same, interaction. The analogy I use is you wouldn't have a sales aid with one page on an unlicensed piece, would you? Because that's one thing. So it wouldn't have one interaction. Now, although that could be confusing, at the same time, it could be very clear to our customer, the HCP, who their point of contact is, who is the person that they could go to, even if they're not quite sure of that. So that's how it exists in the code. Now, when Leo were found in breach of the code because their MSLs were talking about medicines proactively at rep-organised meetings, their breach was your MSLs are actually reps. And at the MSLA last week, people were like, well, so what? What does that mean? Well, it's a really simple breach. If your MSLs are reps and they haven't been properly trained to be reps, that's a breach. Now, if your MSLs, as in with most companies, coincidentally have the reps exams, that's not enough. You can't go, don't worry, PMCPA, we happen to have this from 25 years ago, because they're still not considered reps in the eyes of the code. Is that okay?
That's brilliant. Thank you. I just think it's really interesting. And just think of it from the HCP shoes, that knowing where to go. And a lot of the conversations we're having from a technology platform point of view, and for those of you who are really involved in this, I can see Chris Wade here, Viva at their conference talks about their integration with Teams and how an incoming inquiry for an HCP can field it between the MSL, MedInfo and the representative, etc. And it's actually maybe you could just have one point of contact and avoid all of those problems. Right, voice from the audience. Have we got any questions? Mr. Wade.
Mr. Wade, as always. Good.
Just wanted to lean on Paul's comment about convergence. Is that because it's a deliberate thing, or we're just getting smaller? The number of people in the field organisation now as compared to 5 years, 10 years ago is massively smaller. And it seems to be moving in one direction. So do you end up in a position where the roles are combining almost by necessity? You're not promoting to HCPs, you're promoting to businesses.
Both. Yeah. I think we should be smaller. And I'm almost, obviously, friends notwithstanding, I'm glad that we are becoming more lean organizations. And I think that we also need to coordinate and ultimately become combined teams around therapy areas with both commercial and medical together.
And I suppose what's really enabling this is digital technology, because previously, what was happening is that you couldn't take a chance. So you had to do a scattergun approach, both from primarily a field sales perspective, but also a field medical perspective. Digital technology now is allowing us to better target who we need to engage with, either from a sales or from a medical perspective, understand the best next actions with what materials, and allowing better agility because the trainings are better, scientific storytelling is better. So you can move teams from indication to indication, etc. So I think that is, for many companies, allowing them to be a little bit more streamlined and not have a scattergun approach.
And perfect, not perfect, it's what has to happen to create great customer experience.
Yeah.
Right? We talk about building organizational knowledge around a customer, because at the moment it sits in the head of the MSL or the head of the rep or the back of the Filofax or an Excel spreadsheet, because unfortunately almost every pharma company's locked out field call notes, infantilizing the teams because of fears of pharmacovigilance and GDPR. We trust the team to have verbal conversations with HCPs, but don't write it down.
Yeah.
Don't write down this doctor's a dickhead, because you're bound to do that because you're just a rep. Or don't write all these patients had a headache. Right? Yeah. How are we supposed to learn about our customers and create conversations over time if we're not collecting information and getting those rare insights from it that will change the way we interact with them? And that has to happen cross-functionally for that to happen, or the same individual with data. Got a question over here. I don't know if you just want to grab the mic so that people online can hear the same.
Yeah, it's sort of quite similar to the question we just had, but given obviously the HCP now is approached by these organizations at many different levels, right? Whether they're being recruited for clinical trials or getting patients recruited, or they're being sold to, a lot of what we discussed today. How much do you think, maybe Faisal and Andrew, the big organizations, the actual company structure of the teams have actually kept up with trying to improve, I suppose, the approach and the journey, and looking at more of a full journey for the HCP to support sort of the teams and the the conversations through medical and commercial?
Yeah, I suppose from my perspective, of course, we always want to focus on the patient and we always want to have the best customer experience. And I've been involved in many projects where we've tried to measure that impact on the patient and measure the experience of the HCP. And we've always come up with a solution around better integration, key account management, better cross-function working in the field, and so on and so forth. But when we try to enact change by having some hybrid roles, and I was leading a project in a prior company where we had, just to make things, we had 5 different types of hybrid roles in different countries. It took, what I had to do to get that approved from a governance perspective, just to do the pilot. In the end, it was all cancelled, even though they were working well. And who was it cancelled by? Internal head of sales and internal head of medical. The head of medical said, how can we recruit any field medical person in the future if they know they're going to do the role of a field rep? It's going to denigrate them, that we're not going to attract anyone. The field salesperson said, if we start having field medical in, we're not going to be able to sell anything. They weren't going to be able to say anything. They weren't going to know how to say anything. So internally, it kind of dragged down. So there's a lot more inertia within complex, large portfolio-based organizations than I had appreciated. But things will change. And one thing we'll probably come on to a little bit later is, in the not too distant future, both field sales and field medical will disappear, right? We will just have field data managers. Because ultimately, what the physician wants to know is, how is this medicine going to affect the outcomes for my community, right? And you'll need someone to plug into the EMR system, compute all the models, and then together show what this will mean. So actually, both in the not too distant future will be eliminated. And
I disagree. I disagree, because I think we're still missing the emotive. We buy people, we buy stories, we buy emotions, they drive us. Just pure data and outcomes.
Can I ask you about that, James? Because I was thinking about this beforehand, and you've said the people buy from people thing before, but people buy from Amazon.
Yeah, but that's a toaster, not a clinical outcome. So these are large, complicated decisions. These are complicated decisions.
We haven't broken down Gen Z versus millennials and all the rest of it. The evidence says Gen Z go to social media first. And the evidence says millennials like recommendations and personalization.
But there's still people on social media.
Absolutely, but we still need to break them down.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that purely data only doesn't drive decisions. It drives committee decisions. It doesn't drive an individual's decision. It's a key part of it, but there's a very odd person. Otherwise, we'd all be driving the most fuel economic car that exists. Mm-hmm. Right? That's a big, complex purchase decision. And when I'm in the market for a car, which isn't very often, but I wish it was more often, I love being sold to. Tell me everything about it, right? And it's not just the fuel economy, the capacity, and how often I have to change the tyres that drives that decision.
You love being sold to, though, but you keep referring to a rep as the person selling to you or giving you that emotive content. And I do find it strange that we're into it now, and we've not talked about the power of digital. We've not talked about the fact that the world has moved on, and I know all of our senior people within pharma are all ex-reps, and they see the value of reps. And I'm not like a 22-year-old influencer or anything. I'm in my 40s.
However,
I tried really hard. Yeah.
But digital, it doesn't. Why do we have to have people delivering personal messages? Why can't we have digital delivering personal messages? So data doesn't make someone make a decision. It's an emotive decision that they make, and then they rationalise it with the scientific narrative. Why does it have to be a rep delivering that? Why does it have to be an MSL delivering that? And I think we'll never grow up as an industry if we're always like, how do we improve reps' behaviour? The current model is flawed. Like, there's no one in pharma that can possibly think if Elon Musk created a pharma company, he would model it on Pfizer or AstraZeneca or any pharma company, because we're so rep heavy. Because 20 years ago, that's how we sold. But people don't buy from people. People buy from emotion. And that emotion can be delivered in any way. So your point about Amazon is totally right. Yes, it's just a toaster. It's a product, right? HCPs buy things, and they're buying a product. Now, they're not literally buying it. They're making a purchasing decision, though. I think we've got to get over this obsession of rep, MSL, people v people, and start thinking about the content that motivates these HCPs to do it. And if it means a rep is the best one to deliver it, brilliant. If it means it's an email or a video or a banner, whatever, we've got to get over this world of rep first.
I'll tell you to that point because I came up as a rep. My business is in the field. So yeah, I totally get that. I feel like it's almost a separate topic, and there's lots of research, or not lots. There's plenty of evidence around to do it purely digital with the field team, but often the source of that data, even I would admit, is from companies that are invested in people and field. So I think that's a really interesting topic, but it doesn't get across away from the fact that it isn't just data. It is emotion, wherever that emotion is tweaked from or influenced by. Do we have a question right at the back there? I don't know if Ben, you can reach with that.
Question for Rena. Hi, Rena. I'm Diggy. I'm a medical advisor at Amicus. You touched on influencers, and I was excited when you mentioned that because I was thinking, what would be the challenges, I guess, with promoting to the new crop of clinicians who are coming up and becoming consultants? A lot of my friends who are consultants now are millennials, and they think differently. The person presenting to them is important. An example I'll give is when I was at my previous company, the first thing the consultant oncologist said is like, why are all the men here? Like, where are the women? I think we need to talk about that a little bit. They're going to be challenging a bit more. Are we prepared for that? I think that's something I wanted to ask and see what your thoughts were.
I think it's a brilliant point. Digital opinion leaders are far more relevant nowadays than key opinion leaders. And the example I'll use that shows the power of digital opinion leaders is the issue we had with Brexit. Nigel Farage is a digital opinion leader. He was dismissed because he was seen as a lunatic and he was seen as talking rubbish, and his argument for Brexit was flawed and could easily be pulled apart by very clever people. But the average reading age in this country is 14. So he appealed to those sort of people. He was a digital opinion leader. He influenced people far better than the more intellectual argument for us to stay in Europe. And that's why one of the reasons why we left the European Union was because we ignored the power of digital opinion leaders. There's people talking about our products that we now should be utilising and engaging with, because exactly what you're saying, there's a younger group of people who don't want pharma messages. No one wakes up in the morning and thinks, oh my God, what's AstraZeneca dumped in my inbox today? I can't wait, or can't wait to go onto the Pasiga website. No human being does that. Let's be honest. But there are people who like to find Dr. Steve's thoughts on, the blue inhaler issues fascinating. Now, why can't pharma companies engage with those sort of people? And that's where I think it's working with compliance in understanding how far we can utilise these influencers. And
Rena, if you can speak to, because we were at your conference, and I can't remember the chap's name, but that was a fascinating presentation.
Yeah. So actually, it's a really good question, and I think this whole rise of DOLs or clinician creators is vast. And when you look at some of the things they produce, Dr. Curran, he produced a video on his phone in his car about Wegovy and suicide. He had an absolutely astronomical reach and impression rate. Now, you compare that to the glossy, glitzy, I don't know how much pharma spend on these videos. And, we're really pleased when 100 people visit our website, sort of thing. So it pales into insignificance, the kind of rise of these clinician creators. I have lobbied for so long. I have a compliance checklist with the risks and the mitigation, and I cannot get pharma to embrace the use of clinician creators, even though we know YouTube has a YouTube health shelf, the health shelf has accredited creators, the creators are accredited under WHO standards. Quality is amazing. And there's this arrogance with pharma that it's not quality if it's not our quality.
Is it arrogance or fear?
Sorry?
Is it arrogance, fear, or not knowing how to...
Complacency.
But they're not going to accept fear, are they? So
they don't have to. They can stay in their comfort zone and still earn an above-average wage and send their kids to a good school.
It is arrogance, though. And the influence is such an interesting point, because the best engagement I've seen for one of AstraZeneca's brands, for our flu brand, was Myline Class. She drove the best engagement. So we spent a load of money on beautiful videos, on VAEs, on engagement, and we used a non-scientific person. And the snobbery that we faced from people from certain segments of our company around why we're using a celebrity to do that. But she got more people taking the flu vaccine, more people didn't get poorly, so ultimately we improved our patient, patient outcomes, which is our ultimate objective, apparently.
I'll refer back to Jane Austen. Lady Russell was trusted and respected, and that's why we use celebrities, and that's why we use clinician creators.
So if I talk to the DOL point.
The DOL?
Digital opinion leader.
Oh, okay, yeah, sorry. Sorry, you're talking to the wrong generation.
Sorry, wrong generation.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think it's absolutely clearly important. And if I go back to when I was at medical school, I remember my professor of physiology, and I wasn't at medical school that long ago, but it was long enough, saying to me that when he was at medical school in the 60s, the most trusted resource was scientific journals, right? And he was able to keep up with all scientific literature, not just in physiology, not just in medicine, but across all disciplines. You know, it wasn't easy, but he was able to read everything, right? By the time he was then teaching, he said it was difficult for him to keep up just with data, the new data coming out in physiology. Now, with the emergence of, massive, much more easier and much more global nature, the amount of data being generated is exponentially massive. And from a pharma perspective, why that's important is, coming back to the point that was made, up until quite recently, we had the monopoly on both generating high-quality data, but also disseminating high-quality data. So we didn't need to be that good because there wasn't a lot of competition. We were competing with a few other pharma companies, but no one else was able to generate that data or disseminate it, either through field or other ways. That's now changed. Already that's changed. And digital opinion leaders is one, but there's many other organizations, patient organizations, there's big academic centers who are generating and disseminating a lot more information. So we now need to be at the very cutting edge to make sure the body of evidence out there is correct and appropriate. So things like ChatGPT will pick that up correctly when they start summarizing for a clinician about what to do for patients. So I think it's absolutely critical. One small anecdote is up until we had a medicine which was absolutely transformational a few years ago. And we couldn't understand with this data that we had of why it wasn't getting more traction in the field. All the clinicians were saying this is the right thing to give up front and everything and so forth. After many, many months, we found one YouTube video of a patient advocate saying to patients who had this relatively rare cancer, saying what the most important thing for you to do is to cycle through as many of this class of drugs as possible. So make sure you get this first and this to cycle it. But the data now had come out that you should use this other one up front. And it was because of that one video, globally, we weren't getting traction. When we engaged with that opinion leader, shared the data in an appropriate way, they took that off and things changed. So even just from that one YouTube video, we can see how important. So it's absolutely really, really important.
Thank you. So an interesting point, to Andrew's challenge is we're not going to move forward if we keep thinking of the same model. And I certainly know that's Paul's thinking and principles that the field is important, etc., but is maybe redefining the importance of a KOL versus a DOL. What is an opinion leader? What is an influencer, etc. Ben, do we have any questions from our online?
We do indeed. So we've got one from Sarah Feck, which is, do you think the more mature a product becomes, the less important the role of a commercial field team becomes?
Open that one up to the panelists.
Okay, I mean, I'm not going to comment too much on the role of the reps because obviously it's outside of my remit, but one of our best products, which I'm sure everyone's aware of, Symbicort, has no field force and it generates tens of millions of pounds and there's literally no one in the field selling it. So by the way, I don't know why that is. But, we use purely digital to engage with our HCPs around that.
Yeah, and often it's how you're finishing the race and where you are and what market share you've got and how close it is and whether there's another field force. And, there's an awful lot. When you're facing the cliff of LOE and you're going to lose that exclusivity, there's also maybe, hey, we'll just hit it really hard for the last year to try and maximise, the acceptance of non-generic brand name prescribing. So I think as with all of these questions, it often depends. But it certainly would feel you would expect less investment towards the end of it. It's
a 25-year-old drug. After 25 years, there's nothing left to say about it, right? What's a rep going to say to a doctor? So it's up to us to really start engaging with HCPs on what an amazing drug it's been for 25 years. Look how it's led in the respiratory field. Look at the way that it's changed people's lives. Here's examples of it. So that's back to your point, Paul, about that's all emotive messaging. There's no scientific data left to tell about that product.
Heritage piece and the investment.
Exactly, yeah.
But actually, because the newer product is being sold and Symbicort's the active comparator in those studies, AZ are promoting it. They're just not doing it in a way that they've recognised, which is where the breaches come in.
Yeah.
Back to breaches. Thank you, Paul. Anything to add to that?
I've got a friend called Haider Aleg. He was the head of digital at Ferring, and he was a cost centre and couldn't get any budget for anything, and he did something very clever. He took the aging portfolio of the company and realised that no one was promoting it, and he realised that through digital methods he could sort of seize control, and ended up raising the sales of these aging products by a double-digit figure, giving himself a brand new budget, and then doing all of the things that he was actually supposed to do in his original job. So I think it shows that it's just another example of what Andrew says. If you can be smart with some digital methods, you can breathe new life into these products. They're still relevant. And I just think that we are very narrow-minded in thinking about Europe and the US, and the rest of the world out there definitely still needs those products. And it's a whole other subject, but we are terrible in our companies of even putting any thought towards selling and marketing in countries that have the greatest health burden.
We all have to recognise the amount of unconscious bias, and in sometimes conscious bias, both in terms of heritage and previous models, etc. I met this young man here and the mature product portfolio at AstraZeneca many years ago. Not everything's changed. Any more questions from the audience, Ben?
Yeah, so on the theme of other countries, we've talked a lot today about dual roles and how we can apply them in the UK. We've got a global audience online, so it was just a question on to what extent can this be applied in other jurisdictions, if there are any insights from the panel there.
That's for me, is it? Yep. So the interesting thing is that the ABPI code doesn't talk about MSLs, it only talks about representatives. The ABPI code reflects the FPA code. The FPA code applies to 37 countries in Europe. So if some of the audience are from Europe, what I would say is what we all have in common there, and by the way, Brexit doesn't affect our membership of FPA, is that we all have to adhere to the principles that are set in the European code. The European code isn't specific about reps. So all this nonsense and crap that we have about 3 calls, but that is of our own doing in the UK. So basically, those countries can do what they like because they haven't got those things set in stone. We only have reps set in stone. And by the way, this is another rant, if the public consultation on the code has ended now, but how many companies input into the consultation said, can we get rid of 3 calls a year because no one knows where that's come from? If we don't lobby for stuff, then stuff will stay in there forever, and then we'll just complain forever. And I think we need to understand, if the role of the future, as Faisal said, is maybe this data person, whoever it is, unless we ask for it, we'll be doing this in 20 years' time.
But Rena, none of the business people understand the rules, so they'll never know what's challenged and what not to challenge, so...
God, we're in a vicious circle.
Yeah, and just a shout out to our last event, of which Andrew was a feature on the panel, was Global Warning, Can Global Ever Meet the Needs of Local Markets in Pharma? I thought it was I just wanted to share this. It's not really related to that question, but it just triggered in my head. Andrew managed to diffuse the whole discussion, and again, we all ended up agreeing, because as Andrew put it, if I get this right, you can have a global brand strategy, but you need a local marketing strategy. Yeah. And I just really like that. It's really lived in my head since that event. So thank you very much for that, even though you diffused the whole panel discussion and there was no adversity on the panel. I don't know if anyone else other than Rena has a comment on that. I'm certainly not qualified to speak to other markets.
Especially just on the ex-Europe front as well, if anyone's got any insights on that.
I mean, a lot of the LinkedIn posts that people go a bit crazy about are MSLs in the US. And I genuinely don't understand the difference between them and reps, because they can talk on label proactively about medicine.
There's 40 different job titles for field members in the US. It's kind of crazy, from field educators to it's quite...
But the danger is that people can read things on LinkedIn and apply it to the UK. Because there's no caveat on there, is there, to say this is only for...
So I'm going to make sure that we end on time. even though we started late. And again, apologies for those that got hung up online waiting for us to start. We were having a great time in this room without you. So apologies in advance for that one, or not in advance. Apologies for that one. We'll take one more question. It's got to be a good one, Ben, or one from let's do one from there and one from Ben, and then we'll wrap up. One right at the back there. I can't see who that is.
Hi. I wanted to ask a question. So I run a network of HCP education, digital mainly, pharmacists. And we've had a situation where I think this is becoming a little bit more common, to the point around has pharma become too precious to promote, where pharma are running webinars for clinical pharmacists, but actually making them non-promotional so that you cannot actually talk about medicines. And in fact, you know, a bit of a comment from the panel around, are you actually doing yourself a disservice as an industry by not meeting the needs of the HCPs that you're supposed to be serving?
But yeah, and also not enabling the HCPs to have a conversation around the product that they think they're going there potentially to hear about, but in a non-promotional way. And then we get into this whole confused language and the customer's going, but I can't. I mean, this again came up in our recent engagement, Rena, that if it is non-promotional and someone asks a question about the product, how far can they go, etc. And it's very confusing.
My simple answer, Tiba, is, well, you know my answer on this. Of course they've missed a trick. And by calling it promotion and treating it as promotion, not only can you measure return on investment, but there's actually way less compliance risk. And 9 times out of 10, when I've been in that situation, it is all down to budgets. Well, it's not coming out of our budget, it's coming out of her budget, and she's non-promotional, so we have to call it that. And Code doesn't care.
I got paid once by a pharma company to host a webinar so that I could not mention the company's name and be totally independent from it.
and I do feel this is a disservice to our customers, our HCPs, who are confused by this, but also are grown-ups and know that it's from a pharma company. And even if we say it's non-promotional, they're going to go with the idea that there's going to be some bias because it's this company, because it's sponsored by. However hard we try and we say we're not, there's going to be that mindset going in. So should we be more upfront? Faisal?
Yeah, no, I mean, however, on the other side, I am a big fan of pre-competitive disease awareness kind of, or disease, understanding the evolution of a disease management strategy, and pharma companies working in a consortium to talk about that. Separate independent medical education. And while it may become a surprise to the receiving pharmacist or nurse, educator, or physician, but that is actually quite important because it sets a big foundation, especially if we are talking about an important evolution in how a patient group will be managed and so on and so forth, or safety issues, etc. It is quite important. However, but it can be, for people who come to those webinars or meetings, it can be a little bit dissatisfying if they've not heard the deep data around a specific medicine, of course.
Yeah. Thank you. So, Ben, is there a good one to finish on? No pressure.
You're pretty good.
So at the start, we talked a little bit about field visits and being maybe objectively or subjectively bad. How do you think pharma should evolve in measuring the quality of HCP engagement?
Oh, I'm going to wrap this into a question that I probably should have also raised, which was sent to me early on from Akshay Tekmalka. How is AI going to impact the traditional rep role? And the reason I'm bringing those together is some of us will be aware of STEM healthcare. Used to be called STEM marketing, outgoing auditing field teams, how they translate marketing strategy into sales, how they use their tools, and are they any good at selling? And I wanted to respond to that question. And how we might improve rep roles is there's definitely going to be a rise in AI monitoring, either of remote calls through the platform or listening, maybe from the device, to pick up on sales technique, buying signals to improve and coach. And I think we've got Path here from Acto, which is a platform for training reps, etc. I think it's going to be a lot to do with that. We maybe just need to get over the creep factor of the fact that that's listening in, and is it monitoring, is it going to bully us? No, it's about coaching and mentoring, just like it is when you have your manager out with you. Sorry, I'm the chair and I've answered that question. But let's go to this. How can we improve, if we're interested in improving, rep engagement with HCPs, or even MSL engagements with with HCPs?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very, very hard problem. Very hard problem. I've been involved in things like, informal surveys, formal surveys, net promoter scores, field visits, and so on and so forth. There's no probably good way. And often there wasn't that urgency to measure that level of impact as long as we had people out there using a bit of a scattergun approach. But if we're now moving to a situation where we're going to be moving field sales as well as field medical people, to have that agility to move from indication to indication, 6 months, in order to make sure they're hitting the right people at the right time, getting the right messages and having an impact, that is becoming a much more of a key issue for large companies. And if anyone's got a great solution, I'm listening.
Anyone knows how to measure impact, that would be great. I don't know if we've got any other...
I'd ask a question. I think this shows the massive flaw we've got in this industry, in that how can you have such an expensive resource being used and no one can define what their KPIs are? Every single thing in non-pharma, you have to basically say, this is the reason I'm going to do it and this is the impact I hope it will achieve. Now, you might not achieve that all the time, but I would say, whether it's an email or the reps or whoever, why are you going to go see Dr. Andrew? What are you hoping to achieve with this particular visit? And if it's because it gets my call rates up, that's a non-commercial issue. How can we live in a world where we can measure engagement and yet you have people behaving in a way that is unmeasurable? It's like lunacy to hear that no one can explain why they're going out onto a meeting. And don't buy into this, it's good to chat about golf. We don't pay these people so much money. You don't pay these people what reps get to chat about golf. They should have a commercial objective for that. Now, it might not always be sign on the dotted line, but they should be saying, I'm trying to grab their attention. I'm trying to persuade them to reconsider their bias towards Chiesi and potentially consider AstraZeneca as an option. That is a measurable.
And in terms of measurable, if I remember correctly, the data released by STEM Healthcare of the industry benchmark for the percentage of sales calls that ended with the rep asking for behavioural change from the customer that's commercially aligned with a competitive twist, or whatever I can't whether it is, to ask for commercially aligned behavioural change from the customer was only 50%. So, and now of course not every call can result in that, but 50% seems very low. So I'm, despite being a great advocate for field, I totally agree. And it is that thing. It's what are we measuring and why? And there is no easy answer at this point. But it's really odd, as you say, that there is no easy answer, and yet we keep trying, but also we keep investing.
Can I ask a question to Andrew? So if the code removed 3 unsolicited calls per year, and AZ had to set their own call rates, would it be higher or lower?
It would be higher, because AstraZeneca is a very field force-based company. But I bet the HCPs wouldn't want it to be higher.
Some would, some wouldn't, and I would say it would depend upon you. If you're a good rep and you know your customer, you know the cadence. A is acceptable, but B's needed to move the needle. Yep. And that's why I would never bother trying to call on the Rugby Central practice when I was up in that patch, because they gave up 1 appointment per year and you had to get up at 6 in the bloody morning to queue to get that 1 appointment. I can't move the needle with 1 meeting with 1 person, right? Maybe 3, but even that's tricky. So I think it would rely on the knowledge of the field person and the appetite of the customer.
You can move the needle if the entire responsibility of the whole customer experience doesn't lie with the rep, right? I would have the rep as, and I've got massive amount of respect for the field force, but the task we're doing too much. All of that warming up a lead, all of that shifting someone out of their apathy or their misconception should lie with digital. Right? That's your scattergun approach. It doesn't cost us as much to send out our VAEs, and then we can be like, do you know what, this one's resonating, this one isn't, so let's not use that one anymore. And then we can then prompt the rep, say, do you know what, now's an appropriate time for you to go in, because they've been warmed up.
But you see, without getting too nitty-gritty, if the customer, if that doctor's interested, then it would have moved from call to contact. Yeah. Why are we relying on 5?
Yeah, I'm going to have to wrap this up because I'm conscious that it's 5:30, people leaving, etc. 5. So it's a really difficult one to summarise, except that we all have agreed that sales done well is a good thing, may not always need to be applied by the field team. It could be digital. And dare I say, it could be medical, even if it's a different form of selling projects, selling ideas, etc. So I'm going to ask for each of the panel to leave us with one thought. If you don't have it, just pass it on. But maybe one thought about, if there's this thing getting in the way of us selling, or have we become too precious to promote, what might we do tomorrow to change that or address that?
Yeah, I mean, I would just finish where I started. I've come to the important realization that no matter how good your drug, if you're first in class, best in class, high level of unmet need, great data, no drug will ever sell itself. So every drug needs to be sold. How it needs to be sold and the channels we use and so on and so forth, we need to be a little bit more smart, and we need to measure where we are targeting and what the impact is having in a much more agile and specific way than we've done up until very recently.
I think my last thought is not about reps or MSLs at all, but something that we touched on, which is the rise in influence of patients and doctors to do our sell for us.
I would say we've got to get into a more empathetic mindset and put HCPs, understand what they want, not what we want to tell them.
I would say the future of communications is actually quite easy to see. Just look at young people. We had the question about young people earlier, and I think that it was very clear from the conversation that perfection and glitzy videos does not build trust. In fact, that kind of perfection breeds distrust a lot of the time. And I think that's something that medical need to climb down from, because they are perfectionists by their nature. I think that we have to be authentic, and I think we have to be less lazy, and I think we have to converge and come together as a single unit designed to just raise the awareness and inspire people as to what the future could be.
Thank you. And my last thought is I believe we should be proud to promote our products. And on that note, small plug, I happen to be on the awards committee for the PM Society. And there's a new category I'm very proud of in the digital awards that are going to be in October. You can enter it right now, and it's called Proud to Promote. And it is a category about how the campaign you have done has done good as well as being a promotional campaign. And we often forget that however promotional it might be, we are doing good by raising the profile of good products. The other plug I'd like to say is that for the DPU, thank you so much for all turning up, taking part, asking questions. We're going to take a little break for a couple of months because there's quite a lot of work to put together. It'll be a social event in July, so Just Drinks that you'll all be invited to and come along to. But if you have any ideas for a good one of these where we'll all get together, a good controversial one, please do come and see me for drinks afterwards. We're just going to pop round the corner. Sorry, online people. Just left again to the Clackham pub for drinks where we can continue this conversation. And on that note, I'd like to thank our panellists, Faisal, Rina, Andrew and Paul, and everyone in the audience. Give them a round of applause.